Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, I now enter a brief period where I take a rest, regroup, and start writing even more. But I do need a break. Alas, I have the urge to do some personal projects in writing, possibly even a novel. So we'll be attempting that in my period off. No, it can't be Warhammer. But hopefully some will think it of worth, if I manage that first draft. A dream for decades, and I have few of those left, so best get on with it, as they say. You never know what you can do until you try. Hence, as usual, I will be releasing some compilations of my own wee stories to tide me over. YouTube can be a harsh taskmaster, and videos need to be uploaded continuously. So, in this period, I put out collections to paint or sleep with. I hope you enjoy this compilation for what it is, and I thank you, gentle listener, for all of your support over the year and years. You truly have changed everything in my life. Thank you. I can only hope that I have made some kind of beneficial impact in yours. Now, to the stories. Presumption. Zeltian was always prettier than I. We were true-born, unlike the vast majority of our people. We were both carried to term by our mother. Few can afford this luxury. Only the highest are able to support one who is so vulnerable for so long, and even so, even when the protection is beyond question, still few females choose this route. So many have been passed over during their long period of, well, physical labor, replaced by ardent lovers who have waited decades or more even to have this opportunity. For some, stealing an Archon from their partner is seen as a victory second to none. The vast majority of our young are blurted out of amniotic pods for very practical reasons. To be born is to be carried in the womb of the mother for a tragically long period, and all the while her reflexes and allures are diminished. She is vulnerable. Few can tolerate this scenario. Fewer still would survive it. Only where the blood is strong, the rank certain, the replacement of the mother a thing that would break pacts written in blood, that would cause the fall of an Archon. Only then will they attempt to shore up their dynasty with a true-born heir. Although, unlike the other muling species, we have no real need for this. We are effectively immortal. So pedigree of ancestors matters, but lineage does not. Each child would be a weapon, but one with two edges. The strongest challenge to any Archon can come from their own spawn, after all. It is our way, the path of darkness, the way of the Dark City. The weak are swept away, the strong will rise, no matter their heritage. I can assure you, heritage can still play a strong role in the matter, but only if it is used correctly. So many children have been snuffed out after overestimating their importance, overplaying their hand. So yeah, being true-born is rare indeed. We are better than the half-born. We are superior in every way. Or at least, some are. In most courts, the siblings battle to be the only heir. proving their place in the Cabal by exterminating their closest competition, their own kin. This is expected. It is normal. It is our way. Imagine the surprise my father felt when he had 2 sons reach maturity. Our father, Lord Zaruthian of the Cabal of the Doleful Dirge, always lacked a certain something. Inspiration is what Zeltian always stated. I knew it was beyond just that. He was a relic of a bygone era. Coming from one of the oldest families, he actually believed that his blood was superior, his mere existence the reason for his position. Oh, he held on to it like a drowning man, but he never, ever took risks. And so, he never increased our holdings, never once gambled his life against the spoils of victory. Some might call this the difference between an experienced head of a cabal and the willful, short-sighted exuberance of youth. It went so much deeper than that. With every year, I and Zeltian, my elder brother, witnessed his slowly loosening grasp on the reins of power. How? How did we know? Because we were the proof of the matter. Each year, there had been more audacious attempts on our lives. We rarely spoke or interacted at all before our adolescence, but the enemies of our father became bolder. The usual intricate attempts at poisoning or accidents gave way to gauche assassination attempts. When we had been assaulted thrice in the same cycle, our father, Lord Zaruthian, decided to cut his costs. Capable bodyguards are incredibly expensive. So, he combined our details, and we were soon forced into being practically inseparable. Zeltian was tolerable, but he was so much like our father. Stern, witty, adroit, and able, yet without hunger. The drive to take our cabal forward, further, always looking at what was at stake, not what we could take. And I knew, one day, he would have to do it, would have to attempt to take my life. I was the only one who could threaten him effectively. So, instead, I took a risk. If Zeltian became the Archon for any reason, then I was dead, unless I changed our relationship. So, over decades, I did just that. I subtly and successfully persuaded him that I was the same as he, but the lesser, of course. Stodgy, tepid, defensive, worried. What I would call cowardly, he would call mature. I became a mirror of him to all, a lesser light that only existed to further amplify his glory. I was the moon to his sun. I threw up a cloak so deep, so wide, so consistent, that even Lord Zaruthian believed it. Only our mother, Lady Camas, saw through the ruse. Only she. So, she had to go. Zeltian did not shed a tear, nor did our father. I regretted the necessity. She could have been of use to me one day. And, in the future, Zeltian melted, when I had the perfect opportunity to see him ended. A sloppy but intensely lucky attempt on our lives was performed by an obviously paid-off pack of scourges. When travelling between one stronghold and another, they descended on us like a cloud of bats. Our route had obviously been betrayed, our defenders paired off expertly. And suddenly, from a cavalcade of 12 venoms and 3 raiders, we were down to our transport alone. Wanting to fulfill their compact with proof of death, The scourges took out most of our guards, then descended onto the deck of our raider. We were true-born. We were both deadly, and we slew a dozen of them with splinter rifles and shredders, our shots filling the skies. But they still came on. The Drakon was the last of our men to die under a crossfire of the scourge's heat lances. He evaporated before our eyes. But they could not use such dire weaponry on Zeltian and I. No corpse, no proof. So they limited themselves to shard carbines from there on in. It was dicey. We both sprang and rolled and dealt out death to them easily, but there were many. When our guard venoms that had been driven away began to return, the scourges threw all caution to the wind, and in that instant they had him. Dead to rights. Zeltian stood with 3 of them around him. All I needed to do was stay where I was, pretend I did not see, and they would have ended him. I would then be the only heir. But I did not. I took that risk. I risked my own existence to save my brother. I shot 2 of them away, leaving him only the one to deal with, which he did most expertly, of course, using his husk blade to desiccate the last scourge. And when it was over and we had reached our destination, he looked at me with an expression equal parts awe and contempt. I will never know for certain. Despite his failings, he is a true-born. He hides his feelings well. I feigned relief at his survival, protested that I was born for this moment alone, and potentially others like it in the future. I quietly and humbly told him of his greatness, that he was the only one in all of Cormorah that could engender such loyalty, for he was 1 in 1,000,000,000. I was so convincing. This was the last act in a performance decades in the making. I told him that I was honored to serve such a man. I even kept a straight face when I proclaimed that he would eventually unseat the Lord Vecht himself, and I would be there to bask in his glory. All I wished was to serve him, to be allowed to see that moment, his ascension to the throne most high. And he seemed to believe me. Yet our father, Lord Zeruthian, he did not. And eventually he became impatient. For both of us to survive seemed to indicate a lack of desire and drive, or competence. His children now embarrassed him. One night, he summoned us both to an oubliette. When we stood inside, he made the bold proclamation: only one of us would leave the room alive. A blade then dropped from the ceiling. What he did not know, it was Zeltian and I had invented our own cant. With a flick of my eyebrow, a twist of my lips, I let Zeltian know of my plan. I then attacked him. Zeltian was always fast, but I was faster. He was strong, but I was stronger. He did not know this, of course, as I had always hidden my true skill and attributes from all. Yes, this perceived weakness invited attack, but that meant I was sharper than he. I had more experience in dodging attacks, staying alive. Now, it told. I permitted him to grasp the blade, but then proceeded to take him apart. A sweeping kick that took him from his feet, followed by a backhand as he fell that slammed him into the wall. He recovered quickly and came back at me, slashing and ducking. We danced for an hour. Eventually, I feigned fatigue and let him pummel me. Another risk, but one we had worked out together. We needed to shock father after all. That way he would not look too closely. And I used a knife hand to strike at Zeltian's wrist. He dropped the blade, and I grabbed his long locks and snatched the knife out of the air. I proceeded to push him against the wall and thrust the dagger into his body again and again, without taking a step back. Or so it seemed. But it was only the butt of the blade. Without taking a step back, I watched him theatrically slide down the wall and onto the floor. In the dark, he keeled over and lay on his face. I dropped the blade and stood triumphant. A doorway opened, and there he stood, our father, Lord Zeruthien, sneering. He paced towards me, and had to stifle the shrug that he so wanted to use. Father always knew. He always sensed their similarity, and he expected Zeltian to finish me with ease. I took steps backwards in mock fear, as if I thought he would now slay me for my deed. But we both knew this was not to be. He finally had his heir. He walked to me, and I knelt. He reached down to place his hand on my downturned head, to anoint me as his only son. But when he did, I grabbed his arm, held him in position, as Zeltian bounced up, swept the blade off the ground, and plunged it into the back of his head. And in that moment, Lord Zeruthien made way for Lord Zeltian, the new Archon of the Cabal of the Doleful Dirge. It took less than a decade for him to forget, longer than I had expected, but even so, the moment was a surprise. It is always interesting when a slug develops a spine. Zeltian was always prettier than I, so we agreed to divide and conquer. He would always be the true power, would caress and carouse in the spotlight of the courts. I would take the tedious task off his shoulders. I would be his hatchet, his blade. I would serve as I had always dreamed I could, and every one of my actions would be for his greater glory. He would balk when I initiated confrontations, but never demurred from claiming the glory when all went to plan. Our holdings increased tenfold in that time. Our forces expanded, and all who fought knew my bounty. But Zeltian only knew of that which I informed him. Oh, he had his spies, of course. He was still kin, but he did not know that I had already bought them, with prizes they could never hope to gain from him. He was the target. I had a free hand. Then finally, his egotism won out. He countermanded me in the planning session for our first real space raid. It was not the action itself, but the intent. He was ready to discard me. So, I struck first. A scheme with many facets. It was preceded by a week of smaller attacks and explosions, poisonings and assassinations. To Zeltian, it was as if our entire operation was being torn asunder. He could not pinpoint who he had annoyed, nor where the attacks hailed from. Always the center of attention, he was consumed with his position at the greater court of the city. Could not understand that the genesis of the attacks was not a lord above him in the pecking order, and in those short 7 days he consumed himself. And I made sure it was his last loyal retainers who were always the victims in the assaults. Chasing his tail, reaching out to every single contact and resource, he was shocked and terrified in equal measure. And in his folly, he turned to the one person who had always held true. Me. When advised we retreat to our Bastille at the very edge of the city, he puffed himself up and decried how this would look to the court. But he acquiesced to my request nonetheless. And there, in the fortress I had made, with the guards I had hired, surrounded by men who were bought and paid for, he looked on in stunned silence as I drew my blade on him. He looked to his guards and cried for them to defend him. "Destroy Medrosian! Bring me his head!" Not one of them moved an inch. I smirked as I paced around him, allowing him time to draw his own blade and ready himself. I needed to make an example. We recorded the moment for dissemination across the entire cabal, and then further. I chided him for his weakness as we crossed blades. I derided him as I took slither after slither of his skin from his body, each stroke a work of art. Zeltian had spent his time learning the forked tongue of court. I had learned the true way of the warrior, had even trained with an incubi for a period. I took his head from his shoulders, only when he looked like he would break down and beg for his life. Nothing could destroy our house more quickly. So his head landed at my feet. It was over. I was now the Archon of the doleful dirge. And the next day I executed every last guard who witnessed my enthronement. How could I trust anyone who could permit my brother to be slain? How could I trust anyone who would permit their Archon to be killed? How could I trust any dark kin with my existence? For in the dark city of Cormorah, only the strong survive, and the difference between the strong and the weak can be as simple as bad timing. And everyone, every last member of our race, has their price. Torchbearer. I have witnessed worlds forcibly converted, when time was of the essence, where clemency would mean death to all, where we had to root out corruption to let the greater whole survive. Always a bloody business. We could lose as many as 1 in 3 on such worlds, but then it is understandable. For we, humanity, have always craved a connection with the divine, and when it is established, it is hard to root out, harder still to give up. It is the most personal of things, close to heart and hearth and home. It is identity and custom, law and tradition. To take such things from people is difficult. To tell someone their belief is wrong, often fatal. It casts aspersions not only on the current believers, but all their ancestors too, an insult many cannot bear. And, for myself, I can respect this. If a population gives in to our beliefs too soon, too easily, it shows a lack of conviction in their faith. Some will argue that this is because truth is stronger than lies. The lie of their previous superstitions are blown away before the truth that is the Emperor's might and mercy. Yet, for me, the struggle for the soul of a people should never be easy. Those who kneel too quickly are not true in their devotion, merely cowards without conviction. Thus, after watching one of these forced conversions, I asked to be transferred. Because of my good works, my talent, my ability, and my rank, I gained this most rare of boons, probably because so few wished this particular posting as well. One would be sent for each continent, so a mere 3 of us for an entire world. None had succeeded beforehand, but now it was my turn. A world that would require to be taken intact, we were to have the time to do this properly. The sweet joy of it all. To test my faith against a sea of non-believers. But they were not evil. They were not vile scum or turncoats. They were lambs, ready to be returned, slowly shepherded to the light. And this would be my life's work, to walk amongst the unrighteous, the ignorant, the heathen. I would be on my own, but I would never be alone, for the Emperor is with me, and the Emperor protects. Of course, my father, the Ethnarch of Pentosis, demanded I return home to tend the flock there. Ah, my father, ever the family man. 15 children, and he did not wish to lose even one. Yet, unlike my siblings, I stood up to him. Pentosis was rich and loyal, devout and deeply tedious. The thought of ministering to such a populace made me want to weep. Taking confessions about eating a cake too many, a tryst that should not have been, the moaning and whimpering of pampered princelings and their spouses, hearing the low-level depravity of my family and the court. No, this was not for me. How could I shine the light of the Emperor into such a world where every corner already had 100 candles lit in his name? I worked harder than any but my oldest brother, he who would inherit the rulership of this realm. Where he learnt diplomacy, economics, and armies, I learnt theology, oratory, and rhetoric. Yet, we all learnt how to defend ourselves. If you are of the ruling family, there is always a need for such tuition. Assassins lurk behind every column, best avoided. But you need to know how, of course, and be able to fight when called upon. A good thing indeed, as I had to put it to use in the early days of my missionary. The feral world, a quiet world. It had been cut off from the rest of us for thousands of years in a warp storm. But now the storm had passed, and now we needed to draw them back into the Imperium. The first month of my duty, I had to slay 3 men. A warrior people, I had to gain their attention, despite that they knew I came from the Imperium. Despite my rank and status, and the possibly fatal consequences for the entire village if I had been slain. They had seen the ships, you see, when we first made contact. But that was far above the planet. That was so distant. Only few of them truly understand the depths of their danger. But strength respects strength. So I took truck with sneers and rebukes from the loud, surly, and uncouth. An insult to me meant nothing, but I would tolerate none to the Emperor. The first I bested in a duel with blades. The second with bare hands. The third, by that time I had shown my strength and ability. So I then displayed my power. I shot him in the head with an auto gun. Now that raised eyebrows. But priest, why did you not use your magic before on the other challengers? Said they. Then you would not know the Emperor makes me mighty in all ways. I am nothing but his servant. It is not my power you witness, but his. I have not been challenged since. Yet I always carry my sidearm and my chainsword when outside of the community, helping to hunt the predators who veer too close to our settlements. They are dangerous, but it is not like this is Catachan. The Hyperlions are few. I conserve ammunition, of course. I only have a few crates left. Yet it is good to sometimes display the ranged power I command every now and again. In front of the youths, of course. This prevents me from having to take a head off a shoulder every generation. For on these feral worlds, the price of life is cheap, and the light burns in them brightly. so it burns them out swiftly. No medicine, it tells. And over the decades, I have done it slowly. Unlike the vast majority of ministers, I know I can get a rejuve to continue my work. My father will not deny me this. A single ship comes each decade to check in on our progress, give us supplies, provisions for the next stages of conversion, statuary that could never be forged here, ammunition if requested, some medicines if demanded, and of course, trinkets that will bring them closer to the word of the Emperor. And books, holy books. For these people would one day serve excellently for the God Emperor. Their martial prowess, tenacity and drive were exceptional. They would make elite shock troops in any Astra Militarum regiment one day. This would be their tithe. Manpower. Warriors for the Emperor's armies. But forcing men to fight is a recipe for disaster. They had to walk onto those transports, and I would have them do it with swollen chests and a song on their lips. The tithe was for those worlds brought into the Imperium for populaces that were loyal and pious. So, to merely crush them from orbit would destroy that which was their greatest use, their fighting spirit. Hence, we took our time. For the first 5 years, I did naught but observe, enigmatic in my dealings with all, yet approachable, supportive, a force for good. I learnt their language before even coming, but when here, I learnt everything there was to know of them. Their history, their customs, traditions, structure and perspectives, and, most importantly, their gods. Yet, as with so many peoples on so many worlds, their beliefs were not a million light years from the truth. They too had a central god, and those below them. So I learnt their stories, parables and tales, mostly cautionary, as with any oral tradition. And after a full decade, I then began in earnest. It started with discussions with their elders and their priesthood. The shamans of their people liked me not, for they knew I heralded the end of their ways, or so they thought. Yet, over time, I gained ground. I showed them that there was so little in a name, so little in a colour of devotional custom, so little that was different to that which all humans believed. That they had the Emperor's love, and his power protected them always. It was just that they had lost his name in the sands of time. I explained the roots of their beliefs, and showed them how these were tales from holy terror. That they had just drifted in the 10,000 years since they were secluded from the greater human race. It took time. It took patience. The first generation were the hardest to connect with, but soon entire cohorts of youths were sired that knew nothing odd at my presence amongst them, and they did not fight me. For I had taught them how to read. I had been there at their births, held the midwife. I had been at every major celebration of their family or greater tribe. Through virtue and grace, I let them see what it was to walk with the Emperor. And with each passing season, each passing generation, my authority grew. It was I who persuaded the communities that their priests did not need to take an apprentice, for I would hold their oral traditions. When the last priests of their old ways died in any settlement, it was I who held the ceremony of farewell. As I grew older, they complied ever more easier, until finally I took on those who would have been the priests. It was I who trained them, I who taught them, I who shepherded the shepherds. And on my continent at least, all went according to the patterns of common conversion. I finally heard that in the northern continent there was more resistance, that they had slain my contemporary, that they still headhunted and sacrificed with barbaric practices. There was no way for me to contact the last of my colleagues, as we were on opposite sides of this world, with great seas between us, and the peoples of this world were not seafarers, I can assure you. And the day finally came. Supplanting a culture can be done with slow, steady progress. Tiny inches, small concessions, always bent towards the one goal. The transformation of the people. It merely takes patience and will. Yet, I witnessed it. And my heart near burst when I saw what the Emperor had achieved through me. Finally, I proclaimed the situation in the northern continent. After a mere 100 years, I saw the light of zeal fill their souls, shining through their eyes. It was my pupils that raised a cry, but it was taken up by all around them. Full-throated, near berserk in their fervour, the call went out. Holy war. We would raise the banner of the Emperor, and we would march into the northern continent. We would bring them fire. We would bring them wrath. But we would also bring them mercy. Something unheard of in all of the history of this world. When we marched, when we were victorious, we did not slaughter and sacrifice. We gave the gift of the Emperor's mercy to all who would hear it, permitted them forgiveness, and even, if devotion shone through them, we took them amongst us. Often, it was these very converts who would charge the shield wall. It was these who would throw down their lives for the Emperor with most zeal. And this, it was the light of the Emperor shining in them. It showed all the righteousness of our cause, the truth in our devotion. We fought only a handful of battles before it was over, and then 2/3 of this planet were under my aegis. Under the aegis of the Emperor. Yes, we had used fire and wrath to pacify some regions, but when done, they had been bested by their own, not slaughtered from orbit. They saw the strength imbued in the faithful, and they came over in their droves. But they did so with their martial spirit intact. When I die, which cannot be long, it will be here, and I will make it known that here is where I shall be buried. I have no doubt that my father will still be there on my world of birth, rejuved again and again, as is our way. But for me, one was enough, for it allowed me to do what I have done. I will die here and feel blessed, for this is the world I reclaimed for my God, the God of us all, the Emperor of mankind. All we have to do is stand and fire. That's it. That's what they told us. Stand and fire. If you run, you die. And everyone on this world follows you to the grave. Just stand and fire. Just. I hate that word. Just. It makes everything after its use sound easy. Just stand. But they know nothing. I've done this before, you see, when we fought the greenskins. Deployed on a world as flat as a pancake, we lined up and were told the exact same thing. Just stand and fire. And if we did this, then we would break the Orc flood. They will run, and we will sweep them from the cities, smash them on the plains, annihilate them in the mountains. We will hunt them down and exterminate the Xenos threat. Just stand and fire. And we did. When the ground bounced under our feet from the numbers of them charging us, their battle cries split the skies, hurt the ear to endure. They never stopped, shouting, charging. Thousands upon thousands of them poured into our sight, entire walls of them slain, so much they lost footing. They could not even get to us over the carpets of their own dead. And we continued firing as they kept coming, until they just stopped. Their lines shuddered, the shouting and screaming changed pitch, and instead of bellowing the names of their gods, their guttural screams became whimpers, and they ran. And the officers were right. We broke them again and again. Then we hunted them to extinction. But that was then, and this is now. So, I stand, and I prepare to fire. We are arranged in lines 4 deep, with firing benches for the ranks behind. We are a veritable wall of lasguns. Extra power packs handed out before the battle. We are prepared. We are ready. And the ground shakes again, as it did back then. But this time, the foe are not green, but purple and white. They too screech into the skies, but there are no words, no matter how garbled or simplistic. Theirs is a chittering that claws at the mind. We stand as they close the range. We prepare to fire. It is then that the horror begins in earnest. Micro suns come streaking from the bug horde and explode amongst our columns, melting men and women where they stand. I can see larger beasts amidst the rabble. These things hunch over and dig their front claws into the ground. From their backs protrude long cylinders that belch out these balls of plasma. They sweep into us and burn entire ranks away, the men staggering and flailing as they're engulfed in plasmatic flames. Then barrages of things come from the skies, small black dots getting bigger as they arrive, falling in arcs again from their lines. We see them as they come down amongst us. These balls then explode, not in fire, but shards of armor-piercing death explode from some. Acid explodes from others, splashing all around them, burning people in a different way. Our lines, they evaporate, not just with the death, but from the confusion, the fear, the need to escape from the balls of fire, the horror of these frag attacks. And while all of this is going on, the nasty little ones are closing, charging at us, and we cannot stand. We cannot fire. And so, they hit us. And they consume us. They consume us all. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed these stories, then do consider liking and subscribing, and tipping with a super thanks if I've earned your bounty this day. There is a link to the patron in the video description also, if you feel that generous. But more importantly, now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.